Thank you. Ooh. I have no idea why that is happening. I sound very echoey, don't I? Let's try again. Not good. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So this can come off. Well, I see a lot of familiar faces, and it's fantastic to see so many people come to this. Ooh, how do I get this off? There you go. Okay. I've got a cold, so if my voice starts to go, then we might need to get some help. Resistance to change, and I said a multi-headed hydra. Do you know what the hydra is? Ancient Greek monster. From every time you cut off one head, another head grows. And that's my metaphor for resistance to change. And the journey I want to take you on today looks like this. Yeah, I want to talk about the fact that resistance to change is actually a physiological condition that we have because of the way our brain works. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But it's also a consequence of worldviews, competing, clashing worldviews, and it's a consequence of the fact that we are still evolving. And this is very much at the heart of integral theory, complex thought, is the understanding that we are still evolving. So there's a massive amount of change happening, so many different fronts that view that change, it causes problems. And then I want to talk about the resistance to change at different levels in organizations. Finally, I want to give you an insight or a couple of tools on what we can do differently, how we can compete with rapid change, reduce resistance. So how does that sound so far? Okay. Okay. And if there's anything you want to know, just stop me if there's a question or you can't hear anything. I'm quite up for that. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the piece of the brain that's so important when it comes to change. It's in the limbic brain. We have two centers of memory in our brains. In the hippocampus, we've got explicit memory. In the amygdala, we've got implicit memory, and they operate differently. My talking to you now is coming into explicit memory. How you feel about it and what you may store of it as a memory with an emotional trace goes into your implicit memory. Your explicit memory doesn't start until after birth. And it chugs along quite smoothly, raising its game until later in life it starts fading again. But your implicit memory is running full tilt from the fetus through to death. Your implicit memory is informing while you're still in the womb because of limbic resonance. So that colorful part of the brain there, the creamy part and the purple part and the sort of egg in the middle, that part of our brain is resonating with a mother's limbic brain in the womb. Why does that matter to us? We are resonating right now. Our limbic brains are resonating right now. And our limbic brains will go to fight or flight in under 1/5 of a second. That's its default norm. Fight or flight in under 1/5 of a second, even today. So it's a more primitive brain than our neocortex. I'm going to try again.
Yeah, now the volume is set for the video, that it was too high for that.
Thank you. All right. Ooh. Let me just get this out. How's that? Is that all right? Okay, that's better for me. If our brains are key to fight or flight in under 1/5 of a second, it's part of our survival mechanism. Yeah? You come into a room like this and you see me, I might be a stranger to you, your brains in under 1/5 of a second saying, I don't know if I'm going to like this. Oh, it's fine, then you relax. Yeah? So fight or flight happens first. This matters very much, this fight or flight response, and the fact that we have implicit memory. And I'm going to show you a little video of how implicit memory works. Let me see if that's coming up next. Okay. Implicit memory is full of assumptions that we make. We have so much data going on around us all the time. So from the moment that we're born, and remember that brain is functioning, the limbic brain is functioning in the womb. From the moment we are born, we are putting together patterns of learning. And those patterns of learning get stored eventually in our implicit memory, and even more when we have a lot of data, like how to drive a car or something physical that you do every day. Your brain likes to work efficiently, so it compresses the data once it's learned it terribly well, like a kind of zip file, and pops it into the basal ganglia. And then when you need that information, it just pops out and starts running for you. You don't think about it. In fact, neuroscientists, a lot of them today, say that we've got no free will, that 90% of our brain activity happens below the level of our consciousness. And that's quite some thought, 90%. Much as they say we don't have free will, other scientists say we have free won't. Jeffrey Schwartz, that in about 0.2 of a second, consciousness can intervene. So I might want to strangle you, but I won't. Yeah. And the more conscious we are, the more we can mediate that response. So the less mindfulness, the less consciousness we have of what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what I'm doing, the more likely you behave from a sort of knee-jerk reaction to things. So that's the next emerging piece, is consciousness is terribly, terribly important. Consciousness is a state of awareness that we need to practice, and we're not taught to do this. Funnily enough, wisdom traditions of millennia ago did do these things. They didn't have, of course, the foundation of science that we have to understand why reflective awareness is so important and it's getting increasingly more important. So I'm going to tell you that story as we go through. But because of these little patterns that get compressed and stored in our basal ganglia and then they just pop out, you don't catch yourself thinking in the morning or when you're driving, oh, there's a red traffic light, I wonder what that means today. Only taxi drivers say that. Your brain knows red means stop. And it knows it so fast, you don't even feel yourself thinking that. And you know that it means stop pretty well all over the world. So we've got a lot of information that we're storing. We have to store it in a compressed form and let it pop out like that, because there's so much of it. But the consequence of that is we make assumptions. When a baby is born, the baby's prime need is the question, how do I get to survive around here? Who do I need to watch? What do I need to do to get fed, to get attention? So the baby learns patterns very quickly. It can learn good patterns, it can learn bad patterns. But unfortunately, if you have bad parenting, or fortunately if you have good parenting, you're going to learn those patterns. And those patterns have consequences for the choices you make in the course of your life. A lot of our assumptions that are stored in our limbic brain could be very wrong. So we need ways to shift it, to change, and we can, and we do. But it takes practice. It takes practice. Let's see what I've got next. Okay, yeah. So tell me something, who's experienced buyer's remorse? You've moved house and you think, why on earth did we do this? You buy a new car and think there was nothing wrong with my old one. Okay? And especially for women, I don't know so much about men, clothes. Oh God, I was mad by this. So buyer's remorse, that has a lot to do with resistance to change because the brain seeks certainty. The brain likes to predict what's going to happen next. And you can see why. It optimizes our survival. If you're going to make a path through the jungle, you need to know what the tiger is doing, where the water is, how to find fruit and things to eat. You work out a pattern, and your survival depends on having that certainty. So the brain gets alarmed when we don't have certainty. And as you know, in organizations where you have retrenchments, where you have mergers and acquisitions, where you have systems shifting around and changing, new leaders, new managers, there's a lot of anxiety around uncertainty. So what we need to do is give people certainty. When we don't have certainty, we make it. That's how rumor mongering develops. It's a fear reaction. You have to gather around and say, what's going on? Oh, I think it's this. Yes, you're right, I think it is too. And so the rumor grows, because we crave certainty. So that's another condition of resistance to change. And when we're not given certainty, it touches a lot of other triggers in our brains. David Rock talks about his model SCARF, and it's a brilliant model. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So if you don't have certainty, you may feel that your status is being trashed. You're not valued enough to be given the information you need. That causes us to behave quite badly. If we have no autonomy, if nobody tells us what's going on, how can we choose what we need to do next? It doesn't feel fair, and I can't relate to it. So on a number of triggers in our limbic brain, we're being fired on the negative if we don't have certainty. So that's a big issue in resistance to change. But we do have plasticity. So I think this is what I wanted to show you, and I need to make it play. Neuroplasticity, okay, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because you can change your patterns in your brain. You need to know the practice to do it. Smallest focus, repeatedly. As the old wisdom traditions say, the 10,000 hours. The 10,000 hours. So I just want to show you this little sweet video. You can download these little videos on Google from Centus. It's an Australian company, and it's all free. So let's go back and get it going. Very short, only about 2 minutes.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time we think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-traveled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep traveling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. with repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Okay, so there you have it. We can rewire the brain with focused attention. And here's the extraordinary thing. We change literally our cellular structure through our thought. Wisdom traditions, again, over millennia have intuited this, but now we have the evidence for it, that we actually affect the DNA and the health of our cells from our big toe to our brain through the quality of our thinking. It's really scary stuff. You should listen to Bruce Lipton. Okay, he's a cellular biologist. He's written 2 books. One's selling very well at the moment. I can't remember its title, but the first one that I'm thinking of is The Biology of Belief. It's a very simple book to read, but it's got all the references to the research that you can chase down if you want to. And he's made some remarkable discoveries along with other people. Very recently, there have been 3 studies in different parts of the world which show how thought changes cellular structure. It's not as easy as that, though. And just saying, I'm going to think positively, I'm going to get over something, I've made up my mind, I'm going to be positive, and everything's going to be good. You have to be aware of how you undermine your own positive thinking. So you might say, I know I'm going to achieve this, I'm just going to set my mind and I'm going to do it. That helps. Yeah? But if you have a little voice in your unconscious saying, I don't think I really can do this, you're undermining that neuroplasticity. So again, we come back to mindfulness. Knowing yourself first, extremely well, to understand what are my real thoughts and feelings, what motivates me, because how might I be sabotaging my own progressive development? Bruce Lipton says, in the evolution of the human race on the face of the earth, there are basically just 3 basal paradigm questions. How did we get here? Why are we here? And what do we need to do now that we are here? And depending on your belief system and the information available to you, we do different things with each of those 3 questions. This brings me to giving you a little bit of a history of integral thought on the human constructionist side, the human development side, constructive development, some people call it, the evolution of the human race. I just want to tell you a little bit about what integral theory is, so you understand how it becomes an incredibly important tool for looking at a number of disciplines. It's a lens, a multi-focus lens for opening up meaning from many disciplines. It believes that there has been, and there's a lot of evidence for this now building up, a historic series of transformations through several distinct stages of consciousness. Remember Bruce Lipton's 3 questions? And these stages of consciousness, going back a long, long time, archaic, when the human race was just trying to survive from day to day. And then as people bonded more in tribes, magic and mythic. So I've told the story before, but you can understand it this way. If you've got a caveman or cavewoman hunting bear all on her own, all on his own, and just surviving from day to day, and one day they see another caveman hunting bear over there, and they say, come and join us, let's join forces. Let's have a song and dance, bless our spears, and make ourselves strong together. We've got explanatory systems for why we have lightning and why we have floods, and we can do something about it with our magic and our beliefs. Okay? So that's archaic moving into magic mythic. Now, if you think about this travel in time, archaic was with us and is with us for a very, very long period of time. Then along came magic mythic, which was an increment in development, more complexity. And then much later, only around the 14th, 15th century, rationalism started to emerge. And that was a different set of beliefs. And this was very, very important, this emergence of rationalism, because it separated church and state. And that is significant, because up till then, if you did anything the church didn't like, the state would reinforce it and burn you, or whatever they did. So, archaic for a very long period of time, magic, mythic, going right through to today. I mean, according to our sports minister, we've got witches in the DA, and all you have to do is go to the Sangoma and get your tokolosh, and it'll all be fine. Whether he believes that or not, I don't know, but he said it. And then we have the emergence of pluralism. So scientism started to emerge in the rational era when church and state were separated. And the moment really that you can think about is Galileo. When Galileo said to the Venetian fathers, guess what? The earth moves around the sun, not the other way around. And they said, ban this guy. That's our center of power. We are the center of the universe. And until they wouldn't even look through his telescope. No, don't go there. Until there was critical mass that shifted the belief from that world into a new, more complex world. And it was a critical moment because that splitting of church and state meant that science could start to develop. The search for knowledge and understanding could happen without the church clamping down on what people could do. And you can see even today we have this tussle between church and state. So that's still with us. Then pluralism emerges with an understanding that there are many ways of looking at reality. And that's what we've still been with post-structuralism, postmodernism, Marxism, etc. Plural ways of understanding reality. And what emerges after that? Integral. So each stage is more complex than the next. No stage drops away. They're all there simultaneously. And that's, if you like, our crisis around resistance to change and our crisis as the human race today. Because there's more depth, less span as you go up, as time goes by and these new civilizations emerge. And each one of them have profound belief systems, and the belief systems depend very much on what is known, what you can prove. Integral then, as a theory, has a big picture view. It says we can't dismiss any one of these influences. It has a greater capacity for perspective. Its mantra is true but partial. True but partial. And you can demonstrate that in particularly a field like psychology. He was the big daddy of psychology. Freud. What did he look at? The inner individual. If you just understand what's going on inside you, all will be well. Who was his best friend who fell out with him? Jung. Why? Jung said, no, you've got it wrong. It's not the individual I, it's the collective unconscious. It's a group thing. Okay? They were both right, but partial. We can't live in a vacuum. We're affected by one another all the time. But even today, psychologies fight with one another about which position to take. And then along come Pavlov and Skinner and say, you're all crazy. It has nothing to do with the inner world. It's everything to do with the fact that we're just a bundle of wires and neural impulses. You just have to zap someone with electricity or give them Prozac and everything's fine. And that's true too. Our bodies are mechanical. They do respond to things like Prozac. Yeah, so true but partial. And then, of course, that's the sort of functional side, the Skinner-Pavlov team. But then you get the Marxists and the therapists, family therapists, who say, all of you are wrong. It's neither of those three positions. If you change the system, everything else will work perfectly. Forces of production, good old Marxism. So if the system is working badly, it'll affect people, and nothing else will work well. Every one of those positions is correct. They're all true, but partial. So we're in the position today of, if we don't take this into account, we're missing out a lot. of our story and what we can do to go forward. And the final important piece around an integral emergence or transpersonal emergence is a regrowth of spirit. This is important because with scientism, with the rational era, and the separation of church and state, materialism, positivism, was emphasized more and more. If you can't prove it, we don't believe it, okay? And spirit had to take a back seat. So subjectivity was getting less and less attention, while objectivity was gaining more and more attention. And what are the consequences of that? We have lost connection with the subjective and the objective as an interplay that you can't separate. And that's what integral thought does. It puts that back. So your belief systems, and of course now with cellular biology and neuroscience, we're beginning to understand that. I think sometimes we are truly plugged into the matrix. There's something going on because we are all so connected and there's so many repeatable patterns and we don't know why. So, the quality of your spiritual beliefs, what is important to me in my journey through life is another way of putting that, is really important. So that's just a very brief background to integral theory, and why I love it so much is it covers all the bases. It doesn't seem to want to leave anything out. So Bruce Lipton does this little journey through the millennia differently. He says, every situation, every evolution, civilization has its rise and its fall. So we had animism, which rose from a point of incompetence to a point of competence at the top. Then you carry on more rigid in your ideas because you've experimented with things, this working, you carry on, your ideas are so rigid that you cannot manage change. And as animism then becomes challenged, polytheism takes off. Belief in multiple gods, okay? And that too has its learning curve, its rigidity. We like things the way they are, and then that too falls off when it becomes inadequate. So that's Bruce Lipton's explanation of the movement of civilizations that we've had. He says 5 major periods, and we're about to enter the 6th. And whether the human race survives that entry into this 6th epoch on Earth is a very narrow window of opportunity. Scary, narrow window of opportunity. Because if you look at this picture, the Bruce Lipton picture, and we're still emerging, he talks about holism. Integral talks about global tribe. That actually we're reinventing tribe, not going back to what tribe was when it was splintered and still is in different parts of the world, but that as a humanity, we recognize that we're part of a global tribe. That's a different level of consciousness, different level of accountability and personal responsibility. But just to explain to you this rise and fall of civilizations and the consequence of what emerges when the civilization starts to crumble. And the Roman civilization disappeared, the ancient Greek civilization disappeared, the ancient Egyptian, Babylonian. So he says everybody gets very stuck at a certain point in the pattern of which, what we're used to, how we do things. And in that stuckness, the civilization then starts to crumble because it's not managing change. It's not adapting to new needs. This 6th civilization, the reason why that is emerging, if it's a civilization, is, and why not only Bruce Lipton, but a number of people believe that there's a narrow opportunity for humanity to make the gap. Because all of this is still there. We've still got archaic, we've still got magic mythic, we've still got rational, we've still got plural. And so what is emergent has a lot of resistance and pressure behind it. Does that make sense? So when we talk about changes in organizations as well, let me tell you a little bit about the quality of each of these states that we've been talking about, the movement from archaic through to integral or global tribalism. Each state has a different set of beliefs. What you believe changes your thoughts. What you believe affects your actions. Your belief system are the choices that you make. That will govern the choices that you make. So I want to share with you some information about organizations and their state. Okay, from pre-conventional, organizations that pre-conventional, they are subsistence organizations. Sustainability is seen as a matter of survival. The values base is one of working hard and getting by without doing obvious damage to individuals or environment. Okay. That avoidant organizations are pre-conventional. Sustainability is seen as an attack by oppositional groups. Ignorance of ethical standards and legal responsibilities and apathy towards the negative impact of organizational activities on the workforce. So each one of these stages has its light and its shadow. Okay? So a company or an organization or a group of people operating at pre-conventional, the shadow side of them is deep resistance to change. At the conventional stages, and a lot of you will recognize this, you can have compliant organizations. Sustainability is seen as sort of an imposition. These compliant organizations value conformity. They emphasize traditional values, traditional ways of doing things. They reactively respond to regulatory laws. Efficient organizations at the conventional level, they value sustainability as a source of staying strong, of survival. So they make a business case for sustainability. It's not necessarily a buy-in to what the values really are. At post-conventional stages of sustainability, you have committed organizations, values sustainability as balancing social, economic, and environmental concerns. So it's beginning to go beyond, we have to do this, and this, how can we do it in a way that maximizes our profit? Okay? So at post-conventional level, you're getting more sensitivity, more nuance. It's a way of developing the organization and its stakeholders. Then what is called post-conventional or transpersonal in organizations. The organizations recognize the role and the interplay that they have globally. At conventional level, the concern in our organizations is much more local, my community or just my business, how we do it. So social responsibility might be very limited, but they will make sure that we can talk about social responsibility commitments. At the global level, organizations recognize themselves as being immensely connected and immensely influential in the whole globe. Okay? And that is where consciousness and leadership is going. So resistance to change at the level, the low end of the spectrum of consciousness is very stuck in one pattern of doing things. This is the way we do it, and we can't change. Okay? And the resistance often leads to an outbreak of, can lead to violence. So, what can we do about resistance to change? I think you get the picture now that each level of development carries its own belief systems. And each level also has been dependent on what was known of the world, what we could actually know. For example, when hydraulics was discovered in Britain, and it made Britain great, medical science said, we now know how the body works. It's valves, it's liquid, it's pressure. We've cracked it. Then electricity came along, and medical science said, now we know that it's hydraulics and electricity. You can see things jumping, electrical force fields jumping over synapses. This is fantastic. And only very, very recently have we understood that we have chemical washes that are inert, that affect the development of our brains, our whole body. And those chemical washes could not be seen until recently. Have you heard of glial cells? Some of you who've worked with me before know I've mentioned it. Glial cells, not very known. Glial cells are the most important part of your body. There are 4 kinds of glial cells, and glial cells are responsible for the message that every single neuron and cell gets in your body. And glial cells communicate through chemical washes that are inert: magnesium, potassium, calcium. Glial cells were discovered, they were known about for 120, 150 years. The reason that they've come into prominence now is because of the immense value, the immense importance of understanding what glial cells do in our bodies. They're responsible for life from the very, very first little cell in the womb. Glial cells were thought of to about 150 years ago as just packing in the brain, keeping the good parts together. There was no sort of like insight into why this white, soft packing was there until recently. And that was when Einstein died and his autopsy was done, he was buried without his brain. It was stolen. It's one of the best kept secrets for the last 40 years that the person who did the autopsy failed to return Einstein's brain when he was buried, for a very good reason. He wanted to understand why Einstein was so much more intelligent than the rest of us, so able to think differently from the rest of us. Surely there must be something in the brain. And it's only very recently with Marion Diamond from the University of Columbia who cracked it. Up till then, he'd been sending slivers of Einstein's brain to various colleagues around the world who bought into this secret to say, what can you see? And everyone said, we can't see any difference. It's a mystery. Until Marion Diamond said, he has 4 times more glial cells than anybody else. Now we know that we can predict a child's intelligence through the depth of their glial cells at a very early age. You know, when Christopher Reeve fell off his horse and broke his spine, he and his wife Donna put all their money, all their trust money into glia research for the simple reason that glia in the spine and the brain act differently from the rest of the body. If you break your arm or you cut yourself, glia cells will organize the healing, tell the other cells what to do. If you break your spine, glial cells do just the opposite. They bind off the break so that it can't connect and heal. This is just to demonstrate to you our evolution has come a very long way, and our brains sometimes need an upgrade. They get them, but the limbic brain, okay, which is your emotional brain, and it's sending chemical messages into your bloodstream every second of every day. It's reckoned that perhaps the limbic brain, the glial cells in the spine, don't get the message to heal, because if you're in the jungle, you're having to survive under very difficult physical conditions, what's the point? Rather just die quickly. So that's the assumption, that our brains haven't quite caught up with the fact that we don't need to do that anymore. So glial cells is actually one of the biggest pieces of research at the moment as to how we can firstly heal things like a broken spine, and secondly, how we can understand the impact of consciousness and how our cellular health is affected through our thought, and then help other people manage new states of awareness. Yeah? There's still a lot of resistance to change in our organizations around any of this stuff that I'm sharing with you this morning. Would you agree? It's amazing. Anyway, you are all pioneers here. You are all what Lipton calls cultural creatives, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You want to know more, we can do it together, we can make a difference. And actually that's what we do need to do. We have never experienced a more demanding or fast-paced and complex leadership environment. There are unprecedented challenges for leadership and its capacity and delivery. And we know that most leaders are in over their heads. So what can we do to help? New science of what's called vertical learning, which unlocks powerful yet latent mental, emotional, and relational capacities. Vertical learning, if you just take one line of development, let's say that's the line of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence in integral theory is simply about care and concern. And at the low end of emotional intelligence, which we all have to start at, the care and concern is about me. If you have a baby, a 2-year-old, and they're in the supermarket throwing a tantrum, and the mother says, I'm very embarrassed, please don't scream like that. The baby says, oh, well, I want it. It's all about me right now. And many people still lead from that position as adults. And then we grow into then a child progresses, and at a certain point, the child becomes sociocentric, aware of me and my tribe. So I'll share my sweeties with you and you, but not with them. Okay, so me and my tribe is what matters. We still hold our egocentricity, but it becomes more integrated into our sociocentric world. And then as we go up in terms of our own development, we hope that we become world-centric in our line of care and concern. That, in terms of care and concern, would mean sitting down with me, my tribe, and my enemies with care and concern. And you can see how limited that is still across the world. These people that talk about constructive development theory and the emergence of new civilizations, what's happening to the human brain right now, estimate that 78% of the human race live at sociocentric. And it has nothing to do with education, whether you come from the middle of the Borneo jungle or you're a fat cat CEO in London of a multinational, makes no difference. And it changes the game when you think about diversity, because there's certainly diversity beyond race, as we tend to think of it so much here. That sociocentric concern, 78% of the population across the world is struggling to emerge into a more world-centric consciousness. That's quite something. So we are still evolving, and we are now at the point where we know what to do at a transpersonal level. We know that it's emergent, but we're not doing it. Recently, Ken Wilber, who's really responsible for popularizing integral thought, described this development of the human race across the globe as ladders with climbers and views. So if you're on a ladder at rung 1, you can only see what you can see from that rung. And this is a problem for resistance to change. So if you look at the work of Don Beck and Christopher Cowan, they're built on their teacher, Claire Graves, who was way ahead of his time in positing that humans go through stages of development. You don't lose any stage that you've emerged from. You acquire more complexity, more perspective as you gain more stages of development. Not all of us will go anywhere near all of this in a lifetime. Yeah, but we do know that it's emerged. So if you're dealing with a tribal view of the world, which is me and my tribe and the rest of you can go to hell, yeah, how do you deal with resistance to change? And tribe, because of where it's standing on the ladder, will only see tribe values. Let me demonstrate that to you. Does anybody follow the Vikings on a Thursday night? And how many people in this room have seen Four Corners? So, what I want to illustrate is Four Corners is now. It's what's happening on the Cape Flats right now. It's written by Hofmeyr Scholz. It's a very well acted but very disturbing and violent movie. Our South African actors are amazing. Their talent is really terrific. Why do I mention the Vikings and Four Corners in one breath? Because they're both tribal. And if you understand the militarism, they're both tribal and egocentric. If you understand the militarism, the strong codes of conduct, what governs in light and shadow, there's a lot of shadow in Four Corners. And there's a lot of similarity between the behaviors of the Vikings and our the gangs, things that we see right now. Okay? Simply in the energy and the effort that they placed on maintaining the rules and on strong leadership. Yeah? So strong leadership has its light and its shadow. It can be tyrannical or it can be for the good of the tribe. The difference between the Vikings and Four Corners, what is terrifying is for the Vikings, that was the way life was. If you had to go in and raid a village and you killed the population, they're tough if they couldn't defend themselves. That's just the way it is. Yeah. We know so much more now. We've got so many different options available, and yet we still have that very, very strong force across the world of tribal and egotistical leadership. When leadership emerged from tribe, it was not a bad thing at all. If somebody says, you know what, I hunt bear a hell of a lot better than the rest of you. I track better, I can see danger coming, I can absolutely enhance the quality of our life. If you let me be the leader, that's great, okay? But the shadow of that is my way or the highway. And then emerging from egocentric power gods, we go into a more authoritarian, more structured society, which is still with us. Most of our corporates are structured like that. It's hierarchical. Let's have a set of rules, not just for my tribe or your tribe, but let's have governance for all of us, all the tribes, so that we have something like the UN, we have a body that is that's a set of guidelines for a whole number of different communities, not just mine. So that's what Claire Graves and spiral dynamics refer to as blue order. The problem with somebody at red, at egocentric, is that they don't see blue order. You can only see from the rung on the ladder that you're standing at. So the need for us to move to a transpersonal consciousness is enormous, because we have to help. Firstly, we've got to recognize where people are on that ladder and how to approach that. And secondly, if we don't understand more about a transpersonal universe, we are closing the gap around our ability to survive as a human race. Not that many scientists are very upset about it. If humanity gets taken out, the world goes on. There's still bacteria, cellular organisms, molecules and atoms. Who needs humans? So it's in our interests as a human race to try to actually move our consciousness into a much more global frame. When you get law and order and hierarchies and everybody understanding the system, you also get a lot of rigidity. So then you get someone like Bill Gates or Branson saying, I understand the rules, I understand the necessity for them, but if we just tweak the rules a bit, if I could tweak the rules a bit, we could make a killing. And that's what Spiral calls orange, the enterprise level, entrepreneur. The shadow of orange is greed. And then you get someone like Bill Gates saying to his wife, emerging into green now, you know, we've got a lot of money, we've been very successful, but I feel a bit empty, I think we should give something back. So you get into a more holistic consciousness, wanting to participate, wanting to connect with the world differently. Now, up till that dotted line, the problem at each stage of development is the stage beneath it doesn't see what's above it, can't value it. And we see that, if you think about vegetarians a few years ago, vegetarians were such bunny rabbits, such hilarious creatures. Okay? And now vegetarian is, what's wrong with that? So perceptions shift. And when we move into green consciousness at the humanistic level, that's what we're moving towards, a greater sense of connection. So at green level, that thinking has been responsible for fighting for women's rights, fighting for children's rights, indigenous people's rights. There's a much greater sense of connectedness. But green has its own rules and its own values. And just like a child who believed in Father Christmas yesterday but knows today that it's only Daddy, okay? That child will say to his younger sister, "You're such an idiot." But they believed in it yesterday. Okay? And that's what happens to us as we transition from one level to another. We hate the level that we just emerged from. So we deny that I could have ever been like that. I know much better now. Yeah. So that is the problem up to that dotted line. That at each level of the rung on that ladder, there's a lot of intolerance to the positions below and a lot of misunderstanding, just not seeing the positions above, until you get to transpersonal, above that dotted line. And what we know now is that there is a recognized emergence at the transpersonal level of consciousness. Why does that matter? Because then we can deal with resistance to change. Transpersonal sees the whole ladder. Transpersonal is able to say, I'm not going to be married to this point of view. I'm going to find a way to connect with and understand what other groups value and try to work from that position. Good old Buddhist thinking of meeting people where they are at in order to bring people to where you need them to be. What emerges after integrative and neo-tribal, we don't know. But what we do know is it's still going on. And in our brains as well, our latest development is in the prefrontal cortex. Responsible, it's only 4% of the brain, but responsible for a tremendous amount of the brain's operation, and it's still developing. So what I'd like to just emphasize for you is when the answers to questions change, civilization changes. The forms of resistance change. What can we do about it? We know that the actions we take depend entirely on the quality of the thinking we do first. We need time to think. And this is very much a part of Nancy Klein's work, which I admire tremendously and I'm trained in. The quality of our thinking depends on how we're feeling. If we're feeling bad, we can't think well. And there's a physiological reason for that. In the brain, when you are alarmed, humiliated, angry, or very, very amused even, blood flows into the limbic system. Oxygenated blood, it flows into the limbic system and is constricted in the neocortex. In order to think well, we've got to have balance between the neocortex and the limbic system. So if I'm feeling bad, I'll not be able to think well because literally there isn't enough oxygenated blood in the neocortex to do it. I'm much more concerned about my survival. So the way we feel affects our ability to think well and therefore to act on our potential, and now we've got the evidence to prove it. So what I'm saying is, in order to advance our consciousness and understand resistance to change, we need to give people the opportunity to think well. We need to be able to give the quality of attention that really matters to another person, regardless of how you feel about their point of view. So one neuroscientist, Ian McGilchrist, talks about attention as a moral act because it always has consequences. And let me demonstrate that for you. Let's say imagine this is a lump of rock, okay? And this is a lump of rock carved beautifully into a little statuette. Which are you going to give your attention to? And your attention has consequences. The fact that everybody then says, this is beautiful, okay, and doesn't even see this, changes the value of this. So that matters in terms of the way we treat one another. Our children, our partners, our co-workers, our colleagues. Attention is a moral act. It always has consequences. We need to take personal responsibility for what we want to do to increase our own circle of influence and awareness. And the way we can do that is the way we treat one another when we meet and talk. The quality of attention you give somebody else makes a tremendous difference to how they feel in your presence. So if you've got resistance to change and something you feel very strongly about, like recycling or whatever, the way you are able to engage with somebody else in a one-on-one conversation or a group conversation makes all the difference in dismantling resistance to change. You're calming the limbic brain. When you give people that quality of attention, they feel respected and heard. And when people feel respected and heard, they're less likely to hold on to a position for grim death. So those are some of the ways, that's a most powerful way that I can think of that has had the biggest impact on resistance to change, is give people the attention that they need in order to be able to change perception, rather than shut people down or be directive. So just to sum up, because I'm going to stop now and allow, you must have some conversation, ask questions if you like. We started off with the fact that in our limbic brain, we are conditioned to make assumptions. We are conditioned to have a reaction in under a fifth of a second, a fight or flight reaction. We have stored memories that could be very wrong. We jump to conclusions that may not be correct, and that's part of our brain-based behavior. But when we know this, we can intervene in it. We can have mindfulness, and that is a practice. And then, apart from our brain structure and the fact that we need to have that mindful awareness, we've got to take into account the movement of civilization and the belief systems at each stage and know how to meet them well. And perhaps then all of us will try to squeeze through that narrow gap that some scientists are talking about, and humanity can carry on. That's all I'm going to share with you today, so please ask questions.